The last human species on Earth may not be a single species at all. Inside billions of people alive today are fragments of other humans. Neanderthals, Denisovans. They are gone from the landscape, gone from memory, gone from every city and language, but pieces of them are still working inside our bodies. So the real mystery is not simply why we survived. It is why the human family became one body. For most of our evolutionary history, being human did not mean belonging to one species. It meant sharing the world with several kinds of people at once. Some were small enough to stand beside a modern child, some lived in freezing European valleys, others crossed tropical islands, or adapted to air so thin that many people today would struggle to breathe. And then, one by one, they disappeared. We are so used to being alone that this feels normal. It is not. The strange part is that only one remains. Homo sapiens appeared roughly 300,000 years ago. That sounds ancient until you place us beside the rest of the human story. The genus Homo had already been around for more than 2 million years. By the time our species entered the world, other humans had crossed continents, survived climate swings, shaped stone, controlled fire in landscapes we would barely recognize. Homo erectus is the clearest warning against confusing longevity with safety. This species survived for well over 1 million years, and perhaps close to 2 million depending on which fossils are included. They spread far beyond Africa, reached parts of Asia. Imagine a species enduring longer than every city, kingdom, religion, and written language combined, then vanishing anyway. Evolution does not hand out permanent membership cards. By the time Homo sapiens expanded across the world, the planet still held other human lineages. Neanderthals lived across Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans occupied parts of Asia, though their remains are so rare that much of what we know comes from DNA. Homo floresiensis lived on the Indonesian island of Flores. Homo luzonensis left fossils in the Philippines. The number remains debated because every new cave, tooth, or genetic sample can redraw the family tree. What I find most striking is how badly we once misunderstood that tree. For generations, human evolution was pictured like a ladder. One primitive form stood below another, each step becoming smarter, taller, and more like us. At the top stood Homo sapiens, looking inevitable. But evolution is not a ladder. It is a landscape of branches, and most branches end. No species exposes the weakness of the old story better than the Neanderthals. Popular culture turned them into the image of failure: heavy brow, rough face, bent posture, limited mind. A nearly human creature waiting for a more advanced species to arrive. The evidence tells a different story. Neanderthals had brains that were, on average, at least as large as ours, though size alone cannot tell us how a mind worked. They produced stone tools, including techniques that required a toolmaker to visualize the final shape before striking the first flake. They controlled fire. They hunted dangerous animals at close range. That required more than strength. It required timing, communication, memory, and trust. A lone hunter does not bring down giant prey. A coordinated group does. Their injured bones reveal something even more important. Some Neanderthals survived serious wounds for years. That means someone shared food with them. Someone protected them when they could not keep up. Someone decided that a life with reduced usefulness was still worth preserving. To me, that detail matters more than the size of their skulls. Intelligence can make a tool. Care keeps a community alive. There is also evidence that Neanderthals used pigments, collected unusual objects, wore ornaments, and buried bodies. Some claims, including flower burials and certain cave paintings, remain debated. But the broader pattern is difficult to dismiss. These were not mindless survivors reacting to the next meal. They noticed symbols. They remembered the dead. They shaped their world beyond immediate necessity. They were not unfinished versions of us. They were another version of human. And that changes the entire question. If Neanderthals were strong, cooperative, technically skilled, and capable of surviving brutal climates for hundreds of thousands of years, why did their fires disappear while ours spread? The usual answer is that Homo sapiens was simply smarter. I do not think that answer is good enough. A brilliant individual can still belong to a fragile population. A skilled group can still become isolated. A species can understand its environment and still fail to recover after too many deaths, too few births, or one winter that lasts longer than expected. Perhaps the decisive advantage was never the intelligence inside one skull. Perhaps it was the number of other skulls that intelligence could reach. And if that is true, then the story of the last human species is not about who was strongest. It is about who stayed connected when the world began to break apart. Connection sounds abstract until you imagine survival in a world with no roads, no medicine, and little food stored beyond the next season. A small group could know every river, animal trail, and sheltered valley. They could master a landscape that would kill an outsider within days. But expertise had a weakness. It could die with the people carrying it. If a storm killed 3 hunters, if infection took the only skilled toolmaker, or if several children failed to survive one winter, the damage was not only personal. Knowledge disappeared, skills disappeared, future choices disappeared. That is the hidden danger of a small population. Genetic studies suggest some Neanderthal groups were extremely small and isolated. In certain communities, close relatives lived together across generations, and contact with distant groups may have been limited. That does not mean Neanderthals lacked social bonds. The evidence shows the opposite. But a strong bond inside one group is not the same as a wide network between many groups. And wide networks change the mathematics of survival. Imagine 2 communities facing the same drought. The first knows one valley, one herd route, and one source of stone. When those fail, experience becomes a trap. The second has relatives across the mountains, trading partners near the coast, and seasonal contact with people who know different plants, animals, and paths. One group has local mastery. The other has options. I think this is where the usual story becomes misleading. We picture human evolution as a contest between stronger bodies and smarter brains. But survival may have depended less on what one group knew, and more on how far that knowledge could travel. Early Homo sapiens appears to have maintained larger, more flexible social networks. Shells, pigments, stone, and other materials sometimes moved far from their original sources. Those objects were not always valuable because of what they could do. A shell cannot hunt. A bead cannot stop the cold. But it can signal identity. It can say, "I belong to your people." It can preserve a relationship between groups that may not meet again for months. That matters because a social tie can become food during famine, shelter during migration, or information when animals change route. In a stable year, distant allies may look unnecessary. In a disaster, they can mean the difference between temporary loss and the end of a bloodline. This creates a strange paradox. A Neanderthal group could be stronger, more experienced, and better adapted to a valley than the Homo sapiens nearby, yet still be more vulnerable over time. Why? Because adaptation to one place becomes dangerous when that place changes. Europe during the late Ice Age was not a frozen world that stayed frozen. Temperatures shifted, forests expanded and retreated, grasslands moved, prey populations changed, entire habitats could transform quickly. A group perfectly tuned to yesterday's environment might become trapped in tomorrow's. Homo sapiens did not need to predict every change. They only needed enough connections to hear that somewhere else was better. And once information moved between groups, invention could move with it. This may have been one of our greatest advantages: cumulative culture. No individual had to invent the entire toolkit. One person improved a spear point, someone else changed the binding. Another group learned a better way to prepare hides. A technique developed near one river could reach people who had never seen that river. The knowledge outlived the inventor. That is a quiet revolution. Other animals learn. Other human species learned. Neanderthals clearly passed skills from one generation to the next. But Homo sapiens may have become unusually good at connecting separate streams of knowledge, preserving small improvements, and combining ideas from different places. Innovation stopped being a rare spark. It became a network effect. This does not mean every encounter was peaceful. Competition over caves, water, hunting grounds, or access routes may have turned violent. Archaeology cannot show every confrontation, and the evidence does not support one simple global war. Some meetings likely ended in avoidance, some in exchange, some in sex, some, almost certainly, in blood. But violence alone cannot explain the pattern. A species does not need to kill every competitor to replace them. It only needs to recover faster after each crisis. A large network can lose one camp and survive through 10 others. A scattered population can lose one camp and lose an entire tradition. That is why population size matters. When numbers fall too low, chance becomes deadly. A few failed births, disease, or the death of key adults can push a community past a point from which it cannot return. No dramatic final battle is required. Only fewer voices at each gathering. Longer distances between camps. Fewer children carrying old knowledge into a new generation. What unsettles me is how ordinary that ending may have looked. No one would have announced that a human species was disappearing. There may have been no final witness who understood it. Just one valley where the smoke stopped rising. Then another. Then another. And yet even that is not the end. Because disappearing as a population does not always mean vanishing without a trace. Sometimes survival takes a form no one recognizes until tens of thousands of years later. The proof was already inside us. For most of modern history, Neanderthals were described as a separate branch that ended. A deadline. A failed experiment. Then ancient DNA changed the story. When researchers began comparing Neanderthal genomes with the genomes of living people, they found that many populations outside Africa carried measurable Neanderthal ancestry. The exact percentage varies, but the conclusion was unavoidable. Homo sapiens and Neanderthals did not only compete, they had children together. Picture one of those children. No laboratory, no labels, no concept of species, just a child born into a dangerous world carrying the biology of two human lineages that had been separated for hundreds of thousands of years. To the people around that child, this was not a chapter in evolutionary history. It was family. That changes what extinction means. We often imagine extinction as a door slamming shut. One population exists, then it disappears, leaving nothing behind. But human evolution was messier. Some Neanderthal groups may have vanished through population decline. Others may have been absorbed into expanding Homo sapiens communities. Their names disappeared before they ever had names. Their genes did not. Some inherited Neanderthal variants affect immune responses, skin biology, and how the body interacts with unfamiliar environments. Not every ancient variant was helpful. Some may carry costs in modern conditions, but enough survived natural selection to remain in billions of people today. The body became an archive, and Neanderthals were not the only authors. In 2010, scientists analyzed DNA from a small finger bone found in Denisova cave in Siberia. The bone did not belong to a Neanderthal or a modern human. It came from another population, now called the Denisovans. Think about how strange that is. An entire human lineage entered modern science through a fragment small enough to lose in your hand. Since then, teeth, bone fragments, genetic traces, and a jaw from the Tibetan Plateau have revealed a population far more widespread than the original discovery suggested. Denisovan-related groups lived across parts of Asia and interbred with ancestors of people living today, especially in Oceania and parts of Southeast Asia. One of the most remarkable legacies appears in Tibetan populations. A version of the EPAS1 gene linked to efficient oxygen use at high altitude likely came from Denisovan-related ancestors. Long before modern humans adapted to the plateau, another human population had already faced that problem. Later, through interbreeding, part of their solution entered us. I find that deeply humbling. We like to imagine Homo sapiens surviving because we invented every answer ourselves. But evolution does not care who receives the credit. It preserves what works. Sometimes survival means invention. Sometimes it means inheritance. Sometimes it means meeting someone different and carrying part of their adaptation into the future. That is not a story of purity. It is a story of exchange. And the more we learn, the harder it becomes to describe ancient humanity as a neat competition with one winner. Different populations met, separated, reunited, fought, traded, and produced children. The boundaries between them were real, but they were not always walls. Then there is Homo floresiensis. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, researchers discovered the remains of small-bodied humans who stood roughly 1.1 meters tall. Their brains were much smaller than ours. By the old logic, that should have made complex behavior impossible. But stone tools tell a different story. These humans lived in an island world with giant rats, Komodo dragons, and small relatives of elephants called stegodonts. Their ancestors had somehow crossed water to reach Flores. They survived there for a long period, using tools and adapting to an environment unlike anything on the mainland. Their existence exposes another mistake in the way we think about survival. We confuse size with capacity. A larger brain can provide advantages, but evolution does not reward measurements in isolation. A brain matters because of what it allows a population to learn, share, and repeat. A body matters because it fits a particular environment. A species survives not by winning every category, but by remaining good enough across the categories that matter at that moment. Homo floresiensis was good enough for a very long time. Then, around the period when Homo sapiens became established in the region, their trace disappeared. We do not know exactly how it happened. Climate, ecological disruption, volcanic activity, competition, or direct encounters may all have played roles. The honest answer is uncertainty, but the pattern returns. Another human population, another arrival of Homo sapiens, another silence in the archaeological record. And still, the story resists a simple ending. Because Homo sapiens was not merely a replacement machine moving across the planet, we were also absorbers, borrowers, connectors. We carried tools we did not invent alone, genes we did not originate, and knowledge shaped by landscapes other humans had entered before us. So perhaps the last surviving human species is not the pure victor of a prehistoric contest. Perhaps we are the remaining coalition, a biological library built from encounters, losses, inheritances, and forgotten families. And if that is true, the final question is no longer why Homo sapiens defeated everyone else. It is what kind of species survives by becoming more than itself. The answer may be simpler than it first appears, and more uncomfortable. Homo sapiens did not survive because we were perfect. We survived because we were flexible enough to change before the world finished changing around us. Our first advantage was scale. A small band can cooperate through trust, memory, and family ties. But Homo sapiens learned to cooperate with people we did not know personally. Symbols, ornaments, shared rituals, and stories allowed strangers to recognize one another as part of something larger. That ability turned separate camps into networks. A hunter could die and the hunting method could remain. A drought could destroy one settlement and survivors could join another. A new tool could spread beyond the hands that created it. The group became larger than the people around one fire. Our second advantage was cumulative knowledge. Many animals learn and other human species clearly taught skills, but Homo sapiens became unusually effective at stacking one improvement on top of another. We did not have to begin again in every generation. A sharper point led to a better spear. A better spear changed the hunt. A better hunt supported more people. More people created more opportunities for another idea to appear. Once that cycle began, culture could evolve faster than the body. And that may be the real secret of our species. We are not physically adapted to every place we inhabit. A naked human is poorly designed for Arctic wind, desert heat, high mountains, or open ocean. But we do not enter those environments empty-handed. We arrive carrying stored knowledge. Clothing turns animal skin into an artificial climate. Fire extends the day and changes what our stomachs can process. Boats carry land animals across water. Stories warn children about dangers they have never seen. Our bodies remained limited. Our culture did not. The third advantage is our ability to absorb. We absorbed new foods, tools, landscapes, and sometimes new people. When Homo sapiens met other human populations, the result was not always peaceful. There was almost certainly fear, competition, and violence. But there was also intimacy. Children crossed boundaries that adults may have considered permanent. Genes crossed them too. That means our survival was not built only from what Homo sapiens created. It was partly built from encounters with humans whose names are gone. Contrary to the usual image, evolution did not produce one clean winner standing over defeated rivals. It produced us, and we are not clean. We are layered. We carry traces of migrations, extinctions, adaptations, and relationships that no written story preserved. The people vanished, but pieces of their experience remained in living bodies. This is where the ancient story becomes a modern lesson. We often praise independence as if needing no one is the highest form of strength. But the human past suggests the opposite. Isolation can produce skill, courage, and local knowledge, yet still leave a community dangerously fragile. Resilience comes from connection. It comes from having somewhere to go when your own valley fails, someone to learn from when your answer stops working, a way for knowledge to survive the person who discovered it. Diversity in that sense is not only a moral ideal, it can be a survival system. A community with many perspectives has more possible responses. A culture willing to learn can adapt without waiting for biology. A network that shares knowledge can survive losses that would destroy an isolated group. I think that is the most important part of this story. Homo sapiens did not become the last human species by remaining unchanged. We survived by borrowing, teaching, mixing, remembering, and rebuilding. But that success carries a warning. The same species capable of extraordinary cooperation is also capable of exclusion. The same stories that unite strangers can teach them to fear another group. The same networks that spread tools and medicine can spread hatred, disease, and destruction. Our greatest advantage has never been automatically good. It is simply powerful. What matters is how we use it. Today, there are no Neanderthal camps in Europe, no known Denisovan communities in Asia, and no Homo floresiensis watching from the forests of Flores. The world contains one surviving human species. But perhaps one is the wrong word. We are more like a living library. Most of its authors have been forgotten. Entire chapters were lost before writing existed, yet a few lines remain in our immune systems, in our adaptations, in the way knowledge moves from one mind to another. We are not a monument to purity. We are evidence that survival can come through connection. So here's the question I want to leave with you. Did Homo sapiens truly win, or did the human family survive by merging into us? And if connection was the reason we made it this far, what happens when modern humans choose isolation, division, and distrust? Share your answer in the comments. Is our story a triumph, a tragedy, or something more complicated? And subscribe to the channel, because the deeper we look into the ancient world, the less familiar our own species becomes.